think I had the only agenda item. Daniel's left a thought there. Let me just share my screen. We can talk through it. Okay, so I opened an issue in Pajamas to discuss extending the guidelines on labels, because in Pajamas, if we look at the actual component for a label, the main differentiation that we make between a label and a badge is that a user generates a label, whereas the GitLab system would generate a badge. So when we were creating compliance frameworks, we just used a label next to the compliance, or to illustrate a compliance framework, because users were creating the compliance framework. So we just copied the form that we use for the traditional labels that you would see in issues and epics and MRs, including the scoped label attribute. So now that's kind of created this, I guess you could call it confusion, or at least it's brought into question, should we allow scoped labels to appear in other areas of the product that aren't like the main use case for them, if that makes sense?
And it's solving a similar problem, right, of categorization methodologies for an object, essentially.
Yeah, I'm kind of learning a little bit more on it. So I guess what I've discovered is that scoped labels were initially created for labels feature themselves to create some exclusivity. So you can only apply one scoped label to an issue or an epic at a time. I mean, currently with the compliance framework, you can only associate one compliance framework with a project, but that could change in the future. Maybe you'll be able to associate multiple. And what Annabelle is bringing up is like, that could be confusing, that you could put on multiple scope labels here. And I guess part of my like tension is, do we just tie UI elements to functionality in GitLab? It seems too specific to me. Like, I don't see what necessarily is wrong with just using a label to add flair to your project. What are your thoughts, Nick? I can't hear you, by the way, if you're talking.
I think Daniel has the first.
Oh, I didn't see Daniel join. Cool.
Yeah, he has the first response in the agenda.
Yeah, Daniel, I was reading your comment. I think you were sharing why initially you guys were using labels with compliance frameworks.
Daniel was on the move in our previous meeting too, so I don't know if he'll be able to verbalize his comment.
True. He did want to be flying today, unfortunately, and got shut down.
Let's try to document our responses in the agenda. We don't have to take totally thorough notes, but that way when somebody wants to see what happened in the meeting, we have some documentation about it, even though we do have a recording. Yeah. And then if someone wants to verbalize, I can type while they verbalize.
Also, if you have an opinion on the matter, I'd love any input on the actual issue itself.
So one question I have for you is, what was the particular topic or use case that you wanted to specifically use these types of things? What was the thing that spurred this pajamas issue?
Compliance frameworks are using the label component currently and we reuse the same form. So to try to do the most boring thing, we reuse the labels component itself, which came with regular labels and scope labels. And now that's kind of created some confusion around why are scope labels appearing somewhere else in the product that isn't on issues, epics, merge requests, primarily project planning. This might be the first time we've tried to extend the label component elsewhere. So I could see this coming up again with things like topics, which are another user-generated like categorization item, but currently you don't get any customization. Like you can't make the tag that goes next to your project a different color or change the flare on it at all. So I guess my question is like, what's wrong with using it for visualization flare? Does it have to be tied to a functionality which has meant for project management exclusivity? You can only apply one scope label set to an object.
Hey, can you all hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try this. Just to catch up. So I think what I was saying is that previously the labels, when I was looking at them even before compliance, I was trying to get an understanding of how to use them. And I think just from what I was looking at, that the way that they're implemented is tied to only the specific objects of issues and epics. But if what you're describing is detaching them or having them not associated to a specific object, I think would make more sense because they give more usability. But I understand the problem that Annabelle was bringing up. But my argument was that I don't understand the confusion or the aspect of the confusion if we designate them, for the mirror phrase that, if organizations designate labels per their own organization, right? So in our case, perhaps we can define rules to say you can only use labels for these parameters or whatnot, and other people can define their own rules. So that would allow the flexibility that you would want, but also confusion would be tied to whatever the organization has defined it as. We're kind of artificially imparting a structure that's not necessarily needed, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's similar to what I was also just questioning, Daniel, is how much say do we have on GitLab side of determining the complete applicability of a component being used somewhere else in the product? From my perspective, I thought this was an okay component to use because it was in our component options. When we initially released compliance frameworks, they were these general ones that you could assign to a project, and they would get a randomly assigned color and label. And so as we wanted to extend the functionality of compliance frameworks, we thought, oh, well, might as well just include the scope label set and allow users to customize it however they want to. Like, why should we restrict them? I'm not fully convinced that we should.
Me neither. I agree with you. I think labels are one of the smallest primitives that we have, and to confine it to a particular part of the product, especially when that particular part of the product might not be used by every other sort of type of persona who's also using it. We should be working with the system that gives as much sort of no, I suppose what I'm saying is I agree with you. I think it's worthwhile sort of bringing this up, and I think it's worthwhile sort of taking the learnings from the discussions and arguments that we're having here in order to like basically apply it to the philosophy of the broader design system. Because yeah, this just reducing labels to purely product management activities is probably not making the most out of it.
There's also like, I don't remember exactly, but I think labels are not necessarily tied to a specific organizational element like a project or whatnot. They're much higher level than that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like
Hey, Alexis.
I saw on the agenda we're discussing labels, so sounds exciting.
Sorry, it's hard to keep like something up on my screen and also keep the agenda up. I'm gonna move it over to the side so I can make sure I read that too.
Just to kind of expand, I guess, is like, I think this is probably a fair opportunity just to throw out a research proposal saying, hey, what's the expectations or what's the user requests from a user level, saying like, if we could expand the feature or take apart the limitations, would you prefer that, or does it not help you, so to speak?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think at the very minimum right now, I need to at least make sure in the documentation that there's a separate descriptor for what happens with a compliance framework. Right now it's linking to the scope label set from project management. That's no good. That's definitely not clear. But yeah, I mean, I guess a research effort could help us with user expectations, although I guess one part of me feels skeptical that we'll get the insights we're looking for. I just don't think users are going to think that much about it.
Melissa's
Yeah.
got something on the agenda. I was saying Melissa's got something on the agenda that she's put down. Maybe she can voice that.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think overall, I agree with sort of the sentiment of what you're describing, Austin, that a component should be tied to the problem it's solving, right? Not to a specific part of the system or an object, right? In the case of labels, it's sort of a solution for metadata associated to an object that's more freeform, right? That was the original intent of what it was built for, issues, right? Because of custom fields, but really that concept can apply to anything in GitLab, right? And I think it's a natural sort of like next step that it will be added to more and more things, right? As it's needed to have more of this like rich data that you can now slice and dice by. So I think that's definitely a discussion that should be had, and you know, our design system should, I think, sort of like accommodate that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that if it's a similar problem that you're solving, right, in another object, it's better to have the same component for a lot of reasons, right? Consistency, engineering, consolidation in a single component, right? So I would be supportive of basically pushing for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like a similar but not quite the same problem. I mean, the reason that we're just using a label at all right now is it's just the component we use to render some sort of differentiation in the product. That's it. I mean, you could technically remove it, but then it would make it harder to discover which projects are assigned a compliance framework if you're just looking at a list of them. Yeah, I agree with you on it should be clear in pajamas, like we should be able to follow our guidelines and know that we're safe to use a component here or there and not somewhere else, if that's a constraint. All right. Yeah, I see your question, Alexis, about they're currently being used just for visual flair. All right. So when we initially launched compliance frameworks, if you assigned anyone to your project, it would just give you a badge or a label or whatever you want to call the UI component. I think technically in this case, it should be called a label because it's, well, I guess in this case, it was a badge. As we grew the feature and made it so that users could define what these compliance frameworks are called, what color they are, the parameters that get associated with them, we included the scope label feature by just using form. So technically what I'm saying is when they appear in a list, it's merely for like visual flair next to your project. You can't like remove them from the project list or anything. It's just there to help you differentiate that this project has a HIPAA compliance framework and these do not have any compliance framework.
And so that's just a label, right? There, it's not a scope label.
I think it's, yeah, I think technically it's a badge. And right now, it doesn't even support scope labels on the project list, just because I think it's an older HAML component that hasn't been updated yet. And it might still be using a badge technically and not a label.
Is there a reason you wouldn't use a badge rather than a label?
Yeah, so the one differentiation I see between labels and badges, according to our documentation, is labels are generated by the user. Like the user defines what they are. And then the badge is defined by GitLab. So if the system creates something, tags it, then that would be a badge.
Yeah, I think that could make sense. I wonder if we could expand the badge too, right? Like a user generated badge, because it seems like what you're trying to do is more of like a badge, unless, sorry, I missed part of this because my computer was on the fritz, but like unless you're trying to then analyze those different compliance frameworks or something like that, or like group them, then I think label would make sense probably. But I would see scoped label making sense unless you're for some reason saying like, I want to use this compliance framework until a certain something happens, and then it's automatically going to switch to a different compliance framework. I wouldn't understand why that would happen. I don't know, but
yeah,
because scope labels are like workflow where it automates it for you, and then in the future maybe we could have like rules around that, which could be cool. But I don't know, like could this be a badge, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it technically could be. I think where I've like kind of been confused why it has to be limited to a workflow is like, let's say I wanted to create a compliance framework for SOCs in an environment like AWS. It visually looks better in the application if it's in a scope label, because you can put SOCs in one square and then AWS in the other, as opposed to having like SOCs : AWS. I'll say as someone that didn't work at GitLab before, I wanted to do this, but didn't understand why things were not letting me do it. I didn't understand why GitLab people were putting colons in their labels. I was like, why are you doing this? This is super weird. Just let me like put a scope label here. And then I came to learn that that's a premium feature, and that's why it wasn't working for me.
That's like when I joined GitLab, I was like, and then I think they were going to be called like family labels or something, and that was my first thing, and I was like, I don't know what that means. So what I'm kind of hearing, I don't know, correct me if you're wrong, like, or if I'm wrong, like maybe we can have different like variations of badges and think about like user generated badges, how those might like look, how to make them easier to read, you know, like differentiate different parts of the way that the user is labeling them. Can we have that kind of scoped styling for something other than scoped? And then maybe scoped labels need to be, you know, like the design of them needs to be different. Like we could iterate on that, right? And then somehow the scoped styling could be extended to badges or places where it might make a little more sense.
I think the scope styling is really cool and useful for just visually making things more readable. So that's why I guess I was surprised to find out that there was an opinion that it should be only for like project management purposes. If that's the case, then we should just document it and then extend badges to figure out how to accommodate when other people would want to do something like that.
But that's sort of what I guess the question is, right? Is that what's the difference between badges or labels or scoped labels, right? They're all categorization and organization systems. So again, going back to what I was saying is that maybe we should ask, is there a better way of doing all of this and not just say, oh, we'll make a different version of the same thing?
Totally. And I've brought this up in the foundation's meeting, their office hours, and I've talked with Jarek and Jeremy from time to time just about, should I use a label here? Should I use a badge? And generally they would tell me, we're using a label if the user created it. We're using a badge if the system created it. So that's loosely what I've gone off of. And now it's put me in a weird corner of, well, what if my users want to use a scope label? I don't know if they really care or not. Like if we need to, we can remove the scope feature set, and that like won't probably be a big deal. I just find it odd to limit it because we use it somewhere else in the product. I'm open to discussion on it, so please feel free to.
I have a proposal.
Yeah.
How about we think about potentially integrating badges, tags, and labels into one component. We can document their different use cases, but those different use cases can be documented through our object within our how we describe objects within GitLab, within our design system. So right now we in pajamas, I can share my screen if you like, if that makes it easier.
Sure.
But I'll share my screen. Okay, so we have labels. When I'm looking at labels here, I'm reading this content, and it really seems to me to be describing the particular interaction of the feature rather than particular ways that this component is actually being used. And if you look at label versus badge, they look very similar. I mean, why wouldn't these just be different variants? And then we have this section within our design system now, which is starting to talk a little bit more about objects and how objects should interact and all that sort of stuff. So to me, it seems like we could potentially disambiguate. We could integrate those three components together: badges, tags, and labels, and then we can disambiguate the information, which is talking about how badges, how labels should work within like the project management context, and document it in sort of this object section, sort of talking about what the interaction should be. Maybe that's a way of going about like how we divvy up this information.
Yeah, I agree, Nick. To jump in here, as someone who's not in the weeds of our UI components all the time, right? I just realized there are completely different things in the back end, and I'm learning a lot in this call about the nuances of each and basically how they're different. So I expect our end users probably don't understand that either. And they are surprised by some of the differences, right? So I think that would be very beneficial to start with internally, right? And then we can figure out how we make that more clear to end users.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think I've maybe run this point to the ground though, so I don't know if any more discussion is necessarily productive here, although I really love all the ideas I've heard.
I like it if Alexis could vocalize what she's feverishly typing.
Okay, yeah, please.
Hi, yeah. No. I like, my brain is working better when I type today because I just need more coffee, I think. Yeah, I was just saying I like that idea. I think scoped labels, as they're called today, would be only maybe just in my gut. I'm feeling that might be a little bit different or a little weird to lump in with everything else, just because it's like about automating workflows. But maybe we call it something different than a label. Maybe it's just, maybe it could be a different variant. I just think we do maybe a little bit more research there. Otherwise, yeah, I think that's a cool idea. And like, how could we just kind of scope everything back and just have like one little object and kind of get feedback on that? Like, what happens if badges and labels are the same? What would that look like? So yeah, thank you, Mike. You like my morning puns. Anyway, yeah. Thanks for bringing it up, Austin. This is it's a fun rat's nest, I think.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I just like didn't know what I was getting myself into in some degree. And when Annabelle brought up, I was like, man, that's a really great point. I had not thought about the fact that we have a dedicated like intent for how we use scope labels, like they solve a problem for a workflow and project management. And so I hadn't really thought about keeping that feature just to that area in terms of just using a UI component. Because when I look at the GitLab UI like interface itself, if I was building a website, I would probably use the scope label for some other reason. So I think it's just a fun one to discuss, and I hadn't gotten a whole lot of traction on it yet. So I was hoping to use this forum as a way to get some people excited and talking about it, which I got that. So
I'm glad you talked with Annabelle too, because she basically designed that. Like I said, one of my first projects here, and she was working on that and doing a great job. So she'd have a lot of history there. But yeah, I know, in doing the jobs to be done research and just in general, that's like one of the biggest pain points is keeping things updated, right? Like as you're working and as things move through workflows, and that's the intention of scope labels. So we'll see. Yeah, I'm excited for this.
Yeah.
Austin.
Makes total sense. I get it.
You mentioned a thing called, you mentioned tags. Is tags in our object model for the,
In some form or fashion, I think.
like it's literally
Our
called
object model pretty much just contains MRs at the moment. So we haven't really documented the broad variety of.
in our product is the noun tag used anywhere?
Yes. So
Releases.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and you can see.
Yeah, tags. I wouldn't understand tags if I didn't know, like, have documentation or know people that work on release.
Yeah, you have to tag releases, of course. I knew that. Yeah, we're kind of out of nouns, aren't we? That's why I brought up tags, because it would be nice if we could use that. But of course, we tag our releases.
The foundations team felt like they didn't want to create a third object. They felt like it would be better just to clarify existing guidelines better. So I think right along the lines of what Nick, Alexis, and everybody's been saying here. Just let's keep refining.
What do you need in order to satisfy your job to be done for compliance managers? That's the important thing.
I mean, that's a great question. At this point, I don't really hold a strong opinion on whether or not a scope label applies here. So, I mean, if project management says, hey, don't use this here, we could definitely remove it from the form without the functionality itself. Not a problem. It's purely being used just to help make it more identifiable. I've asked a few people, why are you putting this on your project? Because it didn't have any functionality before. They're like, oh, because I just do GDPR in this project, and it just helps visually make it distinct from all my other ones. So today, like, it's purely being used for visual flair, and I haven't necessarily discovered a need for a specific scoped version, although we know that there are some people that differentiate their AWS from their Google Cloud platform, and their different compliance frameworks could still associate.
Hey, Daniel, can you mute? Oh, there, he's got it. Thanks, somebody probably told him. All right, so if we roll back how we got here, the Annabelle, who designed scope labels, saw that you were using scope labels in compliance and was concerned that people might be confused because that's a workflow thing, and now we're using it for visual flair and this other thing. Is that the only concern we've had about this problem? Not to diminish Annabelle's perspective at all, but I just want to know if, like,
that was the only one that someone had actually brought into the discussion of the issue I opened in pajamas.
Okay, so that, I think that's maybe an interesting step would be to validate that it's a problem with people, I don't know what you call it, teams that are comprised of PMs and compliance people. And if PMs are stumbling across this object and going, why can't I use this in my product flow or project management flow?
Yeah.
How does the problem arise and how deeply felt is it would be an interesting place to go, I think. I think someone else already mentioned that too.
I'll also say that we aren't going to run into license issues either, because to get compliance frameworks, I think you have to be at least premium, and premium's part of scope labels. So that's not an issue for now, at least. I thought about that randomly and I was like, okay, at least that's not something that's going to be a problem here. Like, we're not giving scope labels to someone that's on free or something. So.
Cool. That went by fast. That was a good discussion. I think we're at time.